Can the Mormon Church ever escape its past, especially its past polygamy? Stay tuned for more tonight on Polygamy. What love is this? She was born into polygamy. Her family followed the teachings of Joseph Smith, all of them, including plural marriage, especially plural marriage. Like many young girls, she had been promised to a man who was her father's age. But she fled. She ran away. She preferred an eternity of outer darkness to a life of polygamy. She chose hell over religious enslavement. That girl was me. After I fled, I thought I was free, but I realized I wasn't free. I was lost, alone, desolate. No home, no hope, no life. Then Jesus Christ found me and rescued me, and He loved me. In His love, I found real freedom, a real home, a real life. And Jesus offers you the very same thing. He is a shield to all who will take refuge in Him. He has been a refuge for me, and He can be for you too. Knowing the surpassing love of Jesus Christ today, this is why I can look back and ask, polygamy, what love is this? Welcome to our show tonight. We're grateful that you've joined us for part of your evening. My name is Doris Hanson, and I am the host of the program. A few months ago, I received in the mail a package which contained a book, and it was signed by the author. You know, I hadn't heard of this book before, and I hadn't heard of the author of the book either. It had come unsolicited, and the inscription in the book read like this: "To Doris Hanson, your show has touched my soul. I hope my book will touch yours as well." And in truth, the book did touch my soul. I contacted the author. We met for lunch. We had a wonderful conversation as we got to know each other. And of course, I couldn't resist. I invited her to be a guest on our show, and she graciously accepted. She had grown up mainstream LDS in Bountiful, Utah. She attended BYU undergraduate degree in history and J. Reuben Clark Law School. She left Utah at age 28 to work as a law clerk in the San Francisco Bay Area. Later, she returned to Utah. She married an LDS man in 1984 in the Salt Lake City Temple. She has more than 25 years experience as a trial attorney in the civil justice system, representing both defendants and plaintiffs. She's the mother of two sons, ages 18 and 26 years old. I would like to introduce as our special guest tonight, Kay Burningham.
Thank you, Doris.
Thanks for coming.
I'm very excited to be on your show and watched it for many months and love it.
And when I got your book, I was very surprised. I thought, who is this? I don't think I know. I'm familiar with this name. But when I saw the book, and I hadn't heard of the book before, I think you sent it to me right after it came out.
I think so.
And it was just fascinating. Just the title itself fascinated me. So, and the book is entitled An American Fraud, One Lawyer's Case Against Mormonism. The picture of the cover is there on the screen. Would you explain to our viewers why you wrote the book and where they can pick up a copy, and maybe give them your email, or
Sure.
not your email, but your website address?
The book is available at both Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com online. I'm not certain that it's available in stock at Barnes & Noble. It is available online. Mm-hmm. And there's also a Kindle version that's very inexpensive on Amazon with linked notes. So there's quite a bit of resource material, and it makes it easy. Mm-hmm. My website is just my name. It's easy to remember, kayburningham.com. And as to your first question, I wrote the book because after years of working as a trial attorney and years of being an LDS woman, I felt that there was something in the law that especially Mormon women and maybe Mormon men as well needed to know that fit with the church. And the only way I could figure out how to get that information out was to describe what I thought was going on with Mormonism. And I didn't want to criticize the average Mormon because there's so many good Mormons. And my family, my immediate family, my extended family, the Burninghams grew up in Bountiful. They're wonderful people. But there's something different about the leadership, something that's not forthright, and I think that deserved a serious analysis.
And it needs to be talked about.
I think
it needs
so.
to be talked about. Now, your book is actually in 2 parts. The first part being your life and your experiences as a Mormon, and then the last part of it being from a legal standpoint, your case against the Mormon Church. So tonight what we're going to do is discuss the first part, covering your life growing up and some of your experiences. And then 2 weeks from tonight, on May 10th, we're going to interview Kay again, and we're going to go through one lawyer's case against Mormonism. So you'll want to be sure and tune in on May 10th as we discuss the legal case, possible legal or feasible legal case against Mormonism. So let's get started with your own personal experience growing up as a Mormon. But first of all, let's talk about Mormon doctrine, how you viewed the Mormon doctrine of polygamy. When you were a young girl growing up in Bountiful, how did that affect you?
Well, my father was very supportive, and he was not an active member of the church, even though my mother and grandparents were involved, at least on my father's side, and his brothers were also involved deeply. But he was my biggest champion. He told me I could do anything I wanted to do, that I was smart and talented, and he had a lot of faith in me. And then I would go to church or seminary, and in particular in high school I became involved with a lot of popular Mormon kids at Bountiful High. And in the seminary class I remember listening to section 132 about polygamy, and that the wife has to do whatever the husband tells her to do, and even if it's he has 6 new virgins or however many it was, I couldn't remember. I just remember thinking, that's not right. 6 women for 1 man, and I even did some research into it and found out that there are more boy babies born than females back then. And
that's true.
So I would raise my hand and ask the seminary teacher, well, what about this? What about this? And he just seemed to gloat in this is the doctrine, this is what the Lord wants. And I thought to myself, if I were God, if God is omniscient and omnipotent, I would not make rules like that. I mean, it is not reasonable. It doesn't make sense. Women have the power to conceive. They have the power to do so much in the world. They're at least men's equals. So it bothered me a lot.
And when you were in Bountiful, you talked, it actually quite surprised me, our first conversation, you talked about this particular department store in Bountiful, and it brought back a lot of memories, the co-op department store, I think it was called.
Well, I think, it was the co-op, and it was on Main Street, and I don't know, to compare it to a department store today, it was so small that maybe back then it was considered a department store, but I remember passing that store on the way to get ice cream at Hunter's, and we looked in there, and my mom goes, "Oh, don't go in there, that's the polygamous store," and it was kind of taboo, and they had old shoes and old clothes, and it wasn't very appealing anyway, so. But I had the sense that they were on the periphery of Mormon culture, and I was always looking out for some polygamists to be here.
I wonder how they knew they were polygamous. Of course, I'm sure the gossip machine was going on that. But we used to shop there all the time. So when you said that, it brought back huge deja vu memories. But we would go there all the time. I don't recall that they sold old clothes and outdated shoes, but then I wouldn't know whether they were or not anyway, because we just didn't have up-to-date things as it was. We weren't supposed to. Did you realize as you were growing up that Section 132 of your church's Doctrine and Covenants advocated, even commanded polygamy? Did you know that? Were you taught that?
Yes, I felt that was very explicit, and particularly in high school, as I indicated by my seminary teacher, and that was going to be a requirement to achieve the highest level of exaltation in the Mormon Church. And I didn't want that. I thought if that was a requirement, why would any woman want to aspire to that? Why not just go to the telestial, where there's bound to be more men than women? I didn't.
And I asked this question too because It was only just a couple of weeks ago we got a call on the air during one of the shows. Plus, I get emails all the time and remarks from people. Section 132 is not about polygamy. It's about temple celestial marriage. And yet you could see that as you was growing up in how do...
Well, if you read it, I mean, I think the problem is a lot of LDS people don't read the actual scriptures verbatim, read the history where it came from, just read the language. You can't escape that.
That's what we think, but it escapes them. One lady's email came last week, actually, and she was very critical. And she said the 10 virgins aren't in the D&C 132. That's a parable in the Bible.
Well, that's true.
It is a parable in the Bible, but it's also in section 132. If a man has 10 virgins, he's not going to be sinning. That's what it says.
And it's fine for him to do that. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then also the church, LDS.org, its own website, indicates that section 132 comments on the plurality of wives. And so its own admission is that polygamy is part of the doctrine. I don't see how that argument can be made.
Well, they do it, though, all the time. They do it. So the idea of polygamy was troubling to you. Was that a faith-breaking doctrine for you?
I would say yes. It was always in the back of my mind, along with the racial inequity with the dark-skinned Lamanites and the inability of the blacks to have the priesthood. And that sort of came to a head when I went to South Africa when I was 19 years old. Both those things were very troubling because I did not think that a just God would have any such rules.
And those were troubling to me too, growing up in a polygamy group. But the racial issue, those two issues were big for me as well. Now, the first chapter of your book focuses on the black issue of Mormonism. Would you talk a little bit about your experiences in South Africa and how that changed your view of Mormonism?
Sure. I had never seen a black person growing up in Bountiful, Utah before we left in 1974. And I was a dancer at BYU with a group called Young Ambassadors. And our director took the 4 dancers with Young Ambassadors and combined it with some singers from another group. And we combined with the South African Defense Force Orchestra, which was then, of course, under apartheid, segregated rule. And we had a variety show that raised money for the victims of terrorism. And what that meant back then is that in '74, in both South Africa and Rhodesia, there was a lot of guerrilla warfare. The black native population were trying to cast off white rule, and because it was oppressive and it was wrong, and they were the minority. And so the World Council of Churches had actually come out in support of terrorist activities because apartheid was so oppressive to the native South Africans. Well, our group, BYU, which is of course the Mormon college, didn't think there would be a problem going over there and raising money for the victims of terrorism, and didn't really see any issue with it, I found out. And so we went over there and we did a variety show with Doobie Brothers songs and Loggins and Messina. It was really bright and had lots of costumes. And I kept looking because our director told us, oh yeah, there's going to be some Native Africans in the audience. And I kept looking, and you could only see the first few rows when you're on stage. But when the lights came up and people were leaving, I looked, for instance, in the Johannesburg Coliseum, and they have 4 balconies. And I looked at the highest balcony, hoping that at least that level would be saved for the Bantu, and no, it was all white. And I never saw a black person attend until we were in Chiridzi, Rhodesia, which is about 5 miles from Mozambique. And then there were some that came out of the trees and kind of sat around the periphery. It was an outside show, and they were really, really engaged because they hadn't seen, back then there was no television, one station in Rhodesia, and nobody came to South Africa or Rhodesia to perform, and it just wasn't known. And so that was interesting, but that was the only time we saw that. But the thing that struck me was that the segregation was everywhere. Segregated beaches, segregated buses and entrances and restaurants, and it was Coffer and Blanc and Knee Blanc, white and non-white. And they had sort of a caste system, which was the darkest were the lowest, and then the Indians or mulatto were in between. But they're still non-white. And then the whites, the ruling class. And I thought, that is so unfair. And some of the priesthood holders over there, I asked them, what about the Negro doctrine, as it was called back then? Do you think they'll ever get the priesthood? And I had responses like, no, they're intellectually inferior to us. I don't think they ever will. And yet 4 years later,
they got it.
The revelation. So it was very striking to me how oppressive. I thought, this isn't because of any innate inferiority. This is because one group took control, and they have oppressed the native.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a life changer for you in the way you were viewing some of the Mormon doctrine.
Exactly.
Now today, we've talked about this earlier, today the Mormon Church has officially said that racism was never a part of their doctrine, and they didn't know why the priesthood was not allowed, that it was kind of like folklore or something like that. What do you say about that?
Again, that's an attempt, I think, to rewrite their history, very Orwellian. It's in the book of Abraham. I remembering reading about that. I think it's Abraham 1:26 addressed Pharaoh, and they indicate that he was cursed as performing to the priesthood. And not only that, but in the Journal of Discourses, which were revered.
Excuse me, it's
Sure.
on the screen. Do you want to read that?
Oh, okay. No, you can go ahead, Doris.
In the book of Abraham, chapter 1, verse 26 says, Pharaoh, being a righteous man, established his kingdom and judged his people wisely and justly all his days, seeking earnestly to imitate that order established by the fathers in the first generations, in the days of the first patriarchal reign, even in the reign of Adam, and also of Noah his father, who blessed him with the blessings of the earth and with the blessings of wisdom, but cursed him as pertaining to the priesthood. So they do believe that the priesthood, taking the priesthood, was a curse.
Correct.
Because of a curse.
Correct.
It's right there in their scripture.
Right, which was canonized many years later, but it was canonized, and it's still part of the scriptures today. I mean, there's something in the law that says if you don't disavow something or negate it or say that's not true, then you're deemed to admit it. Especially when the book of Abraham has been out there and that scripture has not been withdrawn. Well,
it's like the polygamy scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants.
Yes.
It's not been withdrawn.
Yes.
And so they still believe in polygamy, they just are not practicing it
It's
right
a
now.
subtle
It's
admission.
the same with racism.
I think that's very true.
And why don't they remove them? Or apologize or something?
Why don't they? Good question. They should.
It is a good question. Now, whenever I come across things like this, I always love to go to the Bible, because the beauty of the Bible is that there's something for everything there. And there certainly are great scriptures in the Bible that deals with prejudice and racism and sexism. But I chose two verses, one from James chapter 2, verse 9, where it says, "But if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers." And so James is saying very clearly that showing favoritism is breaking the law. Now that's the law of God they're talking about. It's not talking about the law of the land, but the law of God. And so it is condemning prejudice, racist, or sexism. And then we have 1 Timothy 5:21, where it says, "I charge you in the sight of God and Christ Jesus and the elect angels to keep these instructions without partiality and do nothing out of favoritism." And so whenever favoritism is showed for whatever reason, whether it's sex or race or anything else, from its very beginning, Mormonism, including the polygamists, they are still very racist. They have been eyeball deep in favoritism from the beginning.
That's correct. And even in our secular law, the 14th Amendment provides for equal treatment under the law. There's not supposed to be discrimination.
Exactly. Let's go to your family relationships. How did Mormonism affect that, your family relationship?
Well, I probably am a good example of the two ways that I think it affects family relationships. When somebody decides that they can no longer believe in good conscience the tenets of Mormonism and they decide to leave the church, it's very troubling. And my marriage, I've been married twice, and I would say both of my marriages to Mormon men were severely impacted by the degree of belief that we each had in the church. And both of them were very staunch. Ever since I was 19, I was questioning, but wanted to believe, but back and forth until I finally left in my early 40s or mid 40s. And so that lack of commitment, equal commitment, or being equally yoked was very troubling. And I think that because Mormonism is so culturally and socially all-encompassing, it's very difficult to have different levels of commitment. And it's certainly almost impossible, I think, to be an ex-Mormon or former Mormon and an active temple-going Mormon. You just can't do it. So, so I think it interferes in the gender roles, women that want to do more with their life than maybe, you know, what the church would have them do. That's a problem, especially when their husbands think that they should stay home.
And then when you chose to leave, how did that impact your family?
Yeah, that was really hard because my extended family is very active in the church, and they're very good people. But for instance, my sister, she's wonderful, and I've always wanted to be close to her. And I do think that the admonition in the temple interview that, you know, about apostates, when they ask, are you involved with any apostate groups? Do you sympathize with any apostate groups, or words to that effect? That has a chilling effect on family relationships. And in my own personal experience, it has really, I think, harmed the relationships with my sibling, my sister, and maybe my extended family as well.
And my question would be to you, to anybody who's watching the show tonight or who will watch our show in the future, would Jesus do that? Would Jesus countenance that kind of treatment, or that kind of, you know, what comes to my mind, pardon me, is a story in the Bible where a rich man came to Jesus and he said, what do I do to gain eternal life? And Jesus knew that he had an idol with money. So he said, you've got one problem. Take your money, sell everything you've got, give it to the poor, and then you come and follow me. And the Bible says that the rich man turned and walked away from Jesus, sad because he was very rich. Jesus stood there and watched him walk away. He didn't run after him. He didn't threaten him. He didn't beg him not to walk away from him. He let him go. And that's what the Mormons and the polygamists and everybody else that tries to hang on need to do. They need to let them go. Jesus did. And that's a good example of what Jesus did. But anyway, that's, you've no doubt suffered from your experience of leaving, like so many people do.
Right. And I think that the really bad part as well is that you can't talk about what's true in religion. It's just verboten. I mean, after you leave, and it would be so much better if you could say, well, this is how I feel, and this is how I came to my conclusion, but there's no speaking about it.
You can't talk about it. No freedom of speech is in it. Let's go to something that we don't want to dig into deeply at all for various reasons, obvious reasons. But what did you think of the temple ceremony and the garments? Do you see them as a sociological component to these requirements of Mormonism?
Well, I think they're controlling devices. I think when you mandate that you wear certain clothing, that your diet should be a certain way, that you go to a certain building and perform pantomimes so many times a month or a year, that is a way to control people. That is a sociological manipulative device. It's not of God. It's not something that is in any way spiritual. It's just a way to keep the members oppressed. And that's how I felt.
And controlled and oppressed.
And I felt that the garments were very suffocating. I thought that I did the pantomimes when I was in 84.
You did them before they took the blood oaths out of the ceremony then. What did you think about those blood oaths?
Well, I'm trying to recall now. I know that I did pantomimes, the slitting of the throat and the bowel pantomime. And I can't remember the exact language, but I do remember initially being almost laughing at how ridiculous the whole thing was and thinking, is this for real? And then when I kind of thought about it deeper, I was very, very troubled. I thought, I can't commit to this. I'm having a lot of trouble. This is very strange and new and doesn't feel like it is at all from God. So it was really, really troubling.
And God would never, in fact, the New Testament says, don't take oaths in His name. It's yes, let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Right.
I've talked several times on our show of how the requirements of the polygamy groups and other Mormon groups are so far removed from biblical basics. In fact, the first time that the Pharisees plotted to kill Jesus was right after that they perceived he had broken the law of the Sabbath day. And it says immediately they went off and plotted on how they would kill Jesus because he refused to comply with their man-made regulations of how to keep the Sabbath day. They couldn't handle the truth, and so they killed him. And in Mark 7, you mentioned the diet requirements. Mark 7, Jesus announced all foods as being clean. There are no dietary requirements or garment requirements or temple oath requirements by Jesus Christ. So you're right, all of this is a controlling, and I think it's a vehicle to place guilt.
Yes.
So that people will carry guilt
Yes.
for not doing what they've been told to do.
And you're right. Mormonism is very legalistic, very letter of the law, and the spirit, it can kill the spirit, I'm convinced.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And that, by the way, is said so in the Bible. Let me share another verse with you from the Bible. In Colossians chapter 2, verses 20 through 23, it says, since you died with Christ to the basic principles of this world, why, as though you still belong to it, do you submit to its rules? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These are all destined to perish with use because they are based on human commands and teachings. Notice it says they're based on human commands, not God's commands. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom with their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value in satisfying the flesh. So these commands of not don't eat, don't drink, don't do this, don't do that, are all human commands. And
I believe.
Create false humility.
I believe so.
And so you recognize that probably without even realizing it's already written about.
I recognized there was a problem with it, and it wasn't until I was older that I put it in its proper perspective as a control device.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened with me as well. Okay, we are halfway through the show now, so we're going to give our message about our ministry. Excuse me, I'm just kind of tied up in my words right now, but we will open up the phone lines. The number is 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820. Please, when you get online or on the air, would you please remember to turn your TV volume down? And we also ask that you don't rabbit trail off what we're talking about. Please keep on topic out of respect for our guest. And you want to call in and ask my guest or me a question, please keep on topic of what we've been discussing this evening. You can begin to call in now, and we do have our message to share with you.
You are watching Polygamy, What Love Is This? Broadcasting live from Salt Lake City, Utah. This program is the broadcast outreach of a Shield and Refuge ministry. Shield and Refuge is a point of first contact for Mormon fundamentalists who question the doctrines of the religion or who are actively seeking for an opportunity to escape the polygamist lifestyle. Examining the claims of fundamentalist doctrine against the backdrop of biblical truth is central to our efforts. We invite you to contact us. Call toll-free at 877-425-9993 or email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. You are welcome to join us in our monthly support group, Life After Polygamy, where you can meet others like yourself who are searching for answers about polygamy and Mormon fundamentalism. We meet monthly in the Salt Lake City area. For more details about time and place, call us toll-free at 877-425-9993 or email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. We want you to know that we've made available to you some outstanding resources free of charge. You will find them at our website, www.whatloveisthis.tv. There you will find the DVD, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy, which documents the real-life stories told firsthand of those who were lifted out of the culture of polygamy through the power and love of Jesus Christ. Also, free of charge to you is the booklet, Is Polygamy Biblical? It explores plural marriage in the context of God's Word and answers questions like, did God ever command polygamy? Is it part of God's plan? While you are at our website, make sure to take advantage of the archived episodes of this program, which can stream on demand directly to your computer. There are more than 100 shows to choose from. And if someone you know is unable to view this program via live broadcast, recommend that they visit this same website every Thursday at 8 p.m. Mountain Time to watch this show through live streaming video. Simply follow the links to the live streaming video page. If you are watching live tonight, we invite you to call us as we open our phone lines. The number is 801-973-TV20. That's 801-973-8820. Now, back to Polygamy, What Love Is This? With our host, Doris Hanson.
Welcome back to our show. We are interviewing Kay Burningham. She's the author of the book, American Frog, One Lawyer's Case Against Mormonism. And again, I'd like to remind you that on May 10th, she will be back, and we are going to discuss the legal side of her book. Tonight we're discussing her personal experience growing up in the Mormon Church. Our phone line is open if you want to call in and ask her some questions or just kind of get into the conversation that we've been talking about. We'd love to hear from you. Our phone number is 801-973-8820. You're welcome to call in now. I want to ask you a question right now about your experience, your training experience as an attorney. How did that training experience affect you as an attorney? How did it affect your view of polygamy and Mormonism?
Well, it's interesting. In the law, you're trained to how to think. Some people think you go to law school and you memorize case law or statutes or a law here or there. That's not what happens. You're trained how to think, meaning here's the law, here are the facts, how do I apply the law to the facts? And there's a lot of cynicism and skepticism tools that you learn to apply during that process. As a trial lawyer, I was always looking at how to prove my case or disprove the other person's case. And so through the decades of doing that and trying many jury trials, I started to view Mormonism as, what if it was on trial? The religion Mormonism, not the people, not any one person, although maybe Joseph Smith would be a good one.
Yeah, we put him up there.
Yeah, but, and I started to think, you know, can this be supported as a legitimate religion? Or is this really a business under the guise of religion? Is this... And so I started to ask questions. I started to say, what is the evidence that points out that it is not a true religion? And I went back to the primary sources and all the writings that people have done and found a lot of really damning evidence that Joseph Smith was not what the church would have you believe, and that a lot of the sources of the scripture is not what they pretend it to be, or not what they pretend it to be. And the whole thing sort of just fell down under close analysis like a house of cards. And that process probably took a year of reading and analyzing, and I thought, this is a fraud. This is no different than the Enron accounting fraud or Bernie Madoff, and this is why we have affinity fraud in Utah, because people believe if you say it sincerely and with enough, you know, charisma.
Isn't that what they do? This is my testimony. I feel it's true. Well, and their feeling becomes their guideline for truth.
And see, truth cannot be determined from a feeling. That's when somebody bears their testimony and gives an emotional account of all these special things that have happened to them. Then they make the illogical, the error in causation, thinking that because they've had these things happen, good things, it must be because the church is true. There's a big jump in logic there, and that's not true. That just doesn't follow.
No, it doesn't. And feelings, I mean, feelings are just too barometrical.
They can be,
just can't.
Yeah, they can be manipulated. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And they are often with this as well. Okay, we have some calls on the screen. You know, there's no lights lit up on my phone. Let's hope that they're there. Hello, Dan?
Hello, hi.
Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, I just have a question that I've been wondering about. In the Old Testament, God gave many laws, of course, and some things in the Old Testament it points out were an abomination to God. And so apart from grace, saving grace, as written by Paul in Ephesians, what standards are there? It seems there's some expectation or standards. You at least shouldn't be like living in maybe homosexuality or living certain lifestyles that might be an abomination to God. Aren't there standards outside of grace? I guess would be my.
Well, of course there are standards that they're all over the the New Testament of what a Christian should and shouldn't do. The grace idea is not that we throw away the law and that we don't have any standards. Grace means that we are saved by grace, not by the law. That doesn't mean that we become lawbreakers and just go out and do everything we want just because God saves us through His grace.
Yeah, I understand that, and there's an article of faith, I believe, in the Mormon Church that you can be saved by the law, which is
right.
Not biblical.
Right.
However, which laws do we know to pick and choose for the standard of a Christian?
Well, the standard,
there's so many.
The standard of a Christian, the Bible tells us that when we become a Christian, God writes His laws on our heart. And when His laws are written on our heart, then we know what's right and wrong. We know it. In fact, even the non-Christian has a conscience. They know something's right or wrong. And so when His laws are written on our heart and we know what's right or wrong, we just don't do the wrong things. And all of the law is summed up in two: love God and love each other. And if we do everything, we won't ever do anything that will either hurt God or hurt our fellow man.
So those two laws again were to love God and love one another. I guess would be to sum it all up.
All the laws are summed up in that, because we'll never do anything that would offend God or hurt each other. That covers it all.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we have line 2, Matthew, Salt Lake City. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, I've got a question for your guest, Kay.
Okay.
I'm not sure how to put this. I don't want to sound offensive, but I mean, you're obviously an intelligent woman. You're an attorney, and you're articulate. My question is, why did you get married in the temple twice? I understand the first time you said you were young, a younger woman, but you mentioned that you knew how ridiculous the blood oaths and all that stuff was. So why did it take you a second time to make the same mistakes before you figured out what a fraud the Mormon Church is?
Thanks, Matthew. I think there was a misunderstanding. I was not married in the temple twice. I was married once in the temple in 1984. My husband was abusive, and we were divorced. Is he still there?
I think he hung up.
Yeah, and so I wasn't married a second time. My second husband did try to get me to go back through the temple, and that didn't work out at all. So.
Okay, so you weren't married twice in the temple?
No, I wasn't.
But you were married twice?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew, for calling in. And we have our next call is line 3, Ed in Centerville. Hello, Ed.
Yes.
You're on the air.
Yes, Doris, are you there?
I'm here. We're both here. Do you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I do. The temple ritual work was alluded to, but I seldom hear about the discussions regarding where it originated from. Was not Joseph Smith a master mason with a charter from the Lodge of England, where this ritual was then taken and used as part of the temple ritual? I used to be a Mormon, and when I questioned this, I was told that it was the opposite. The Mormons stole it from the Masons stole it from the Mormons. That it was actually religious in nature. But historically, that is not true. That's one of the things that led me away with some of the questions I had that, historically you can research this and find out what's true and not true.
Have you done much research on that?
Yeah, yes, Ed, you're absolutely right and correct. And from my research and just what I noticed in the temple, if you learn about the Freemasons and how they use symbols of architecture and hold your hand to the square and the grip and the nail and all these signs are allegories.
If you would like to make a call.
Whoop, he hung up. Go ahead.
They're allegories for Freemasonry and as well as the oaths and penalties. They were there in Masonry, I believe, from my research prior to Mormonism, and very coincidental that Joseph Smith became a Mason, and just soon thereafter they were added as requirements in the temple ceremony. So clearly the Masons had a lot of influence on the LDS temple ceremony, and it just doesn't make sense for people to be raising their arm to the square when they have nothing to do with the construction industry.
Yeah, yeah. And another interesting thing is, I don't know if you've come across this remark, but Joseph Smith, when he got into the religion thing, he said, we have to restore Christianity because of this so-called apostasy. He did the same thing. He said the same thing about Masonry, that they needed to restore true Masonry because the true Masonry had been lost.
Corrupt. Yeah.
So it was the same story, just a different organization.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was quite funny when I read that. We have an off-the-air question. They said the daughter has converted to the Mormon church. Is she now forbidden to have contact with her non-LDS mother? Would you know if they would do that?
I don't think that's true. I think, as I said before, my understanding and from communication with current Mormons now, in the temple worthiness interview, they just ask if you sympathize with apostate groups. I don't think the church, as a matter of policy, requires that you sever ties with your father or your daughter or any of your family members. But in fact, sometimes that's the unhappy result. So I don't think it's a matter of policy.
And it definitely happens with polygamy groups. Yeah. If you leave, it's over. They just won't even allow that. So I hope that answers your question for the off-the-air question. Okay, we have Martha calling from Cottonwood. Hello, Martha.
Yes, hello.
Yes, you're on the air, Martha. What's your question?
Hi, thank you so much. Not so much of a question, Doris, but just a thank you for the service that you are providing for us. Just watch your show regularly. And when I tuned in tonight, I saw that you were interviewing Kay Burningham, and I just wanted to say that I am currently reading her book.
Oh, wow.
And it is a wonderful book. It is so well documented. She has almost 700 footnotes in here from all sources, her legal status, her personal story. It's just quite intriguing to me, and it has taught me so much more than what I had already known about the truth of Mormonism. I do come from a mixed Mormon, non-Mormon home. I myself am a born-again Christian, so I can kind of testify a little bit to the shunning, shall I call it, one way or another that sort of occurs. While it's not, I know it's not church, LDS church authorized to do that probably, but it really does happen. And but I just wanted to comment to thank Kay for her book and to thank you for your ministry, Doris.
And thank you, Martha. And I need to say we thank the TV station who offers us this opportunity, and for all the many people behind the scenes who also make this possible. And we are very grateful for that. And Martha, please watch in a couple of weeks, because Kay will be back and we're going to talk about the legal part of her book, the last half of her book. And so be sure and watch on May 10th for that too.
I will be tuning in if at all possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Okay, Diane calling from West Valley. Hello, Diane.
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air.
Thank you, honey.
What's your question?
Hi, Doris.
Yes, what's your question?
I love you so much. You have done so much for our whole world, actually. You have done so much. And you're such a beautiful lady and a wonderful person. And your visitor there with you tonight, I've got her book too, and I'm reading it, and I thank her too. And I just wanted to ask you one question. I was a Mormon until 1983. Then I was reborn again, and I'm a Christian now, and I am not well. I've had cancer 3 times, and my one oldest son has died, and my other 2 children have left me. My family's left me because I left the Mormon religion, and I am now a reborn Christian, and this is very, very hard on me, especially being ill like I am and I just want to know what is your best advice to me to do about this. Should I just keep trying or just keep reading the Bible, which I do all the time, or give up, or what should I do? Doris, I'm just asking you, please tell me what to do.
Well, Diane, don't ever give up. Don't ever do that. You have someone who is with you, and that someone is Jesus Christ, who is God himself. And he is our comforter. In the Gospel of John, it tells us that the Holy Spirit comes to live within us when we become born again, and he is our comforter. So be comforted knowing that. And as far as the family, your Mormon family that has shunned you, that is such a heartbreak, and you can't help that. But you can pray for them, and get Christian fellowship, get other people around you who will help to help you out of these depressing times. But just keep your faith and just keep your trust in God, because this happened to Jesus. And Jesus said if it would happen to him, it would also happen to those who follow him.
Well, Doris, bless your heart, I just believe every word you say, but I just get so lonely because me and my daughter were so close. And
are you involved in any Christian church, Diane?
Sees me, has anything to do with me.
Diane, are you involved with any church?
I'm trying to find. I cannot drive anymore because of my health, and I'm out here in West Valley, and I'm trying to find somebody that will take me, come and pick me up, and I'll even give them gas money if they'll take me to a good Christian church.
Diane,
I have not had any good results. If you know anybody out here,
Diane,
3500 South area.
Don't give your address.
Would you,
Diane,
somehow let me know?
Diane, why don't you leave your phone number with the operator, and we can contact you and get a hold of some Christian churches in your area where they would reach out to you and help you and pick you up for church or whatever. But you do need to have people around you so you won't be so lonely and depressed. So whoever has line 2, would you take this lady's telephone number, and then Diane, I will give you a call and we can talk about this off the air.
Thank you very much, and I love Doris very much.
Thank you, Diane.
She's a sweetheart, and anybody that ever puts her down, they're out of their mind.
Well, Diane, all people makes up the world, and thank you for calling.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Good night.
Bye.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and people who are inclined to pray for people, why don't you pray for Diane? Okay, line 3, we have David calling from Bountiful. Hello, David.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I just wanted to call and say you are the most courageous woman, Doris. Your bravery and the things you've been through in life.
Well, I don't know if it's courage or if it's just the Lord helping me along.
God bless you.
Yes.
And I just wanted to comment also on Kay and her book. It's definitely something to write a book like this that is definitely true, that goes against the culture, the people that are involved in this religion or cult or this control that they have in their lives. For you to write that and to expose it,
that's courage too.
Unbelievable, courageous woman, and I'm grateful for you, and God bless you.
Thank you, David.
I'm engulfed in the LDS Church. I'm surrounded by it. I am a born-again Christian. I put all my faith in Jesus Christ. My family, my wife, no one knows any of this. I know the truth through God and the Spirit, and I don't think that I could get away. I don't think I could get out of it and survive because of the way that they treat the people that do decide to leave that find Christ and want to dedicate their whole lives to Christ. The church just shuns them. They do unspeakable things to them. I fear that I would lose everything if I did that. So I feel kind of ashamed because I secretly watch your show and Sean McCraney's show, and I go to a Christian church on Sunday after I go to the LDS church.
Good.
And I wish I had the courage and bravery that you and Kay have.
Well, the day may come when you'll come up with more courage than you thought you had too, because God gives us courage and boldness.
Thank you.
Thanks for calling.
Thank you, David.
I pray for you guys, and thank you for the book. The book is great. I read it straight through.
Thank you, David.
It's wonderful, and it just uplifted me, and thank you for writing that.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for calling. Good night. Okay, we have a couple of off-the-air questions. The first one is, if men are polygamists in heaven, where will all the women come from, since they can only get there by marrying Mormon men? Can you figure that equation?
Let me read that one more time.
If men are polygamists in heaven, where will all the women come from, since they can only get there by marrying Mormon men?
It's sort of a catch-22, isn't it?
Well, they get a second chance. When people die, they get a second chance. The baptisms for the dead, and then women, if they choose to go to heaven, then they get to go to heaven if they become a polygamous wife of these Mormon men, maybe?
Maybe. I haven't worked out the details because at one point it just became not important to me when I left. So, but that's an interesting sort of question.
And it's a question that can't be answered, really.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And even if the Mormon Church hummed and hawed around that, they couldn't.
That's true. But it brings up something really interesting is when the church reports its statistics every April on how many new baptisms and new members of record, I was wondering about baptisms for the dead, and there's been a lot about that. And I wonder if they count the baptisms for the dead in their new members.
A lot of people have been asking that question.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, I thought that was interesting.
We don't really know the answer, and they wouldn't tell us that either. Okay, the next off-the-air question, Kay, is for you. Do you ever get bad mail because of your book?
You know, I'm surprised at how little there has been. In fact, I did get a bad review when it initially came out on Amazon, and it was 1 star, and the gentleman referred to Bootists, Bootists, and Amazon, I believe, took it down because only a small percentage of people thought it was a valid review. After that, I haven't really had any hate mail, so to speak, if that's what you're asking about, until a few days ago, maybe a week ago, and I had someone email me directly indicating that he was also a lawyer and he was upset about what I had said. But on the other hand, I've had several lawyers come out in direct support of me and what I've done, and some very favorable comments from my peers. So, that's bound to happen.
Oh yeah, you get the good and the bad, but it's nice to read the critical ones as well, because you know what kind of people, where they're coming from.
You do
reading your book.
You do. That's true.
Okay, another one for you. Would you, Kay, comment directly on LDS leadership? Are they pathological liars? And what is your basic view of the LDS leadership?
Well, that is a very broad question, and as we know, LDS leadership encompasses 115 or so men, if you count the First Presidency, the 12 Apostles, and the 2 quorums of the 70s. And certainly I cannot make a blanket statement that they're all pathological liars, and nor would I. But there are different levels, I believe, of understanding and of knowledge among these men. And I think certain men who are educated in the law and who are highly intelligent are being deceptive in what they do. And I think it's really hard for them. And I think psychologically, when you come to the point where you realize something you have believed in is a lie, you have to go through a number of steps before you accept that. And I think we've seen that lately, because first there's denial, then there's anger, then there's justification, and all these steps, I believe, are being gone through by many of the leaders of the church at different levels, at their own pace, depending upon how much they've become aware of the truth of the church. I know that there are people who worked for the church, like Ken Clark, who have indicated that lying for the Lord is condoned. And there's a gentleman in my book who I interviewed, and he also says that it was suggested that building testimonies were the most important thing, and not the truth. And so, you know, it's unfortunate. Also, Fanny Stenhouse, who was a writer in the 19th century, I believe it was her, or it might have been Annalisa Webb, but she characterized and broke down Mormons into two groups: the lay membership, who were really good people, really trying to do what was right, and then the leaders who manipulated them and exploited them. And I think there's some truth to that.
Definitely is. And those are two good books I would highly recommend. Fanny Stenhouse's book called Tell It All, and Annie Liza Young's books. She was one of the wives of Brigham Young, and she writes a lot about her life with Brigham Young and in the early Mormon, and you'll be appalled at some of the things that the early Mormons did. Kay, we're out of time. I want to thank you again so much for coming. It's been such a pleasure to work with you through this. And I would like to make our closing comments referring to something Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, verse 6. He said, "I tell you that one greater than the temple is here." You know, the Jews held their temple in great esteem. It was the center of their worship, the place that the annual sacrifice of atonement was made by the high priest. The Jews loved their temple. There was only one temple, and God warned there was only one place where he would put his name. And that place was on the one temple in Jerusalem, and there was no other place in the whole world that he would put his name. That temple was a type of the person who was going to be coming, who would completely save his people from their sins. The temple only served as a pointer to Jesus Christ, and John 2:21 tells us that Jesus is the true temple of God. But when the true temple came, they mocked him. They claimed he wasn't who he claimed to be, which was God in the flesh. He was a threat to their religious system. In fact, Mark 15:10 tells us that they envied Jesus, and that's why they killed him. And when they placed their temple rituals above the temple of God in the flesh, he warned them, one greater than the temple is here. So what do you value as equal to Jesus for salvation, or more necessary than Jesus? Would it be the united order? Would it be plural marriage? Would it be your temple work? But one greater than the temple has come. God even destroyed the man-made temple because one greater than the temple had come. Jesus is God's temple. One greater than celestial marriage, one greater than any prophet has come. We cannot serve two masters. Jesus said we'd love one and hate the other. Throw out everything except Jesus Christ and love him alone, because one greater than the prophet, than the temple, than your world, than your garment, than anything, one greater than everything has come, and he is greater. He's all you need. Thanks for watching our show. Good night. Thank you, lady.